when my mother was in her bathroom, they have a common bathroom, she heard cars arrive and a lot of doors slam. So she peeked, she stepped up and looked out the window, and she saw 6 or 7 military vehicles and dozens of armed men come out. So she kind of put two and two together and realized that they were coming for my father. So he said, when they opened the door, they together, my mom and dad, and he went down. We all went down, and he opened the door, and it was a colonel, if I'm not mistaken, who was there waiting for him. He saluted, in fact, my father and said something like, "Sir, I am inviting you to Camp Crame." And I recall my father said, "Is this an invitation I can refuse?" And the colonel replied, "I'm sorry, sir, but this is not an invitation you can refuse." And then my dad said, "Well, that's fine. I hope you'll allow me to put a bag together to put some clothes in the bag." And he said, "Oh, no problem, sir." And they sat down in our lanai while my dad went up with my mom and put the small bag together. And then when he came down, they asked my older brother, who knew how to drive, to follow them so that we would know where they were going to be brought. And I recall my mom waking me up early in the morning, maybe about 6 o'clock, telling me to change because we would try to visit my father. We went to, by that time my brother had come back and reported to where my dad had been brought. We went to Fort Bonifacio. It was the gate where there was a driving range. We weren't allowed beyond the gate, so we parked right there and then waited, and after some time we saw a bus, a big aircon bus with men inside. If I recall, Chino Roses was in the bus, Ramon Mitra, Max Oliven. I don't recall if Ninoy Aquino was also there, but many members of the opposition were there. And they all waved at us, and my father was one of them. We tried to follow and tried to get permission to visit, but we weren't allowed that day. It took a number of days before we were allowed to visit. And then we would be allowed visits pa-iba-iba. Sometimes they would say, "Okay, you can visit once a week." Then ginawa nilang twice a week. After a while, ginawa nilang every day. But there were times we would go for our visit and they would simply turn us away and say, "Sorry, no visit today." And what I recall really was the indignity that every time we would visit, we were all, from my lolo up to our youngest child, were all stripped naked, searched. So all of us would have to remove all our clothing when we would enter the detention facility. Next, I remember, this must have been in 1974, if I'm not mistaken. In March, my mom woke me up about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and said, "The military is downstairs, they're returning all of Dad's things." So I went down with her. It was a big 6x6 military truck. And everything we had brought into my father's cell, meaning yung toaster oven niya, yung mga libro niya, lahat, one by one, binababa ng sundalo doon sa garahe namin. And so my mom approached the soldiers and said, "Bakit niya binababa yan? Nasaan ang asawa ko?" Obviously, they had been instructed not to say anything. They didn't utter a single word. They just continued to remove all his things until the last item was out of the truck, got into the truck, and drove away. So it turns out that both Ninoy Aquino and my dad were taken out of their cells in Fort Bonifacio and brought to an undisclosed place. By the time we reached there, it was already dusk, early evening. And so we were with the Aquino family also, parang naka-convoy kami. And then we got out and an army man came out and said, "Okay, you can visit, but you'll only be allowed 30 minutes. And I recall all of us were like protesting. We took 4 or 5 hours to drive here, and then you're only going to allow us to see our father for 30 minutes. Sige na lang. So we go, they bring us to this place, and We couldn't even touch him physically. There was one barbed wire here and then another barbed wire here, so all of us family were here, and then it's about a meter and then isang barbed wire and nandun siya. The whole time we were with him, he was holding his pants. He had no belt. They had apparently taken away his belt. And he was holding his pants from behind. So my mom, one of the first questions she asked him was, "Why are you holding your pants? Did they hurt you?" And he said, "Oh, physically they didn't hurt me. But they put me in a room which had no windows. They boarded up all the windows, walang ventilation. It's March yun, so mainit nun, summertime yun. And he said, I've lost a lot of weight. So if I let go of my pants will fall." Sabi niya ganon. Apparently, they had been put in solitary confinement and held incommunicado for about 2 weeks, if I remember right, more or less. And they were not allowed any contact with any persons. All of their belongings were taken, even his rosary and his pipe. My dad used to smoke a pipe at the time. And the light switch for the cell was outside the room, so he had no control over when they would be illuminated or not. They weren't told where they had been brought, and later he told us that when they were brought there, in the middle of the night, they were taken out of their cell in Fort Bonifacio, blindfolded, put into a helicopter, handcuffed to the helicopter, and brought to a place which later turned out to be Fort Magsaysay in Nueva Ecija. Those are experiences I cannot forget. What I find most ironic is that my father was never charged. He was never even told why he was being detained and why he was being kept in prison. And even when he was released, they never gave any reason at all.